Hello and welcome to Clay to Canopy, the show where I attempt to make just about everything from the ground up. And welcome to the Don't Wake the Dragon Interior Makes series, aka The Dragon Season 2. Now I am kicking off this series with a long overdue video. This video should have been made ages ago because this cat couch right here was one of the most popular videos, is probably the most popular video on this channel. Today I am going to be making a cat chaise lounger for this dragon. Fly, the outdoor cat, has claimed it as his own, and he is the little black and white prince that matches perfectly with the interior of this dragon. And I thought, what better way to welcome him home than to make him his very own throne. So, let's do this. I'm feeling kind of lazy today and I have no desire to clean all of that off to pull the table saw out. I'm going to do this with my jigsaw. Since this piece is getting upholstered, I don't really need perfect lines. It was going to be covered over with the fabric and the foam. If all you have is a jigsaw and you want to make one of these, you'll be good to go. So I swear by getting a jigsaw. It's sometimes called a saber saw. Back in the day, I was working away in my parents' backyard with nothing but a jigsaw and drill, and I built a ton of stuff. We're going to do this minimal tool way of building. I have a piece of 1/2-inch plywood. I marked out what I want for the base and I'm going to cut that first. I'm going to try and cut as close to my line as possible, holding my saw steady. This has a nice straight edge, so if you wanted to, you could clamp down a piece of wood to help hold the edge, and then that way you get a nice straight cut. I'm going to forego having to put in that guide. Now you should clamp this down onto a work surface or onto some sawhorses for safety's sake. Got a little bit of an uneven line here. I can either sand it down or take another pass. I'm gonna just take another pass. My line is not perfect. This would be much more perfect if I cut it on a table saw or used a circular saw, but it doesn't matter because we're upholstering things. I do need 20 by 14. I don't want to make a cut where I have just this flimsy little piece that I'm trying to clamp down. Since I have the length of this board, I'm gonna use that to my advantage. This is the piece I need, this little section there. But if I make this cut first, then I'm gonna have to try and clamp down this small piece. It's not gonna be as easy to clamp down. I'm gonna take my jigsaw and I'm gonna cut this line first. Then I will come back and cut in this direction. In woodworking, you spend most of your time setting things up and trying to figure out your cuts. As I came into the cut where the two met, I slowed down my saw. That way I don't end up with hair out. We're gonna use this to make our little back panel piece for the curved part. I need to make sure I have a certain width for where this is gonna go inside the dragon, so I will put in just a couple tick lines. This is the width I know I have to work with. You could use a compass. Sometimes I feel it's more bother, so I just find something round to trace. That'll do. And I'm gonna taper this a little bit. I will need 2 of these. I'm gonna cut one first and then use it, trace onto the other piece. Now when you're cutting circular pieces like this, do yourself a favor and drill yourself some pilot holes to give yourself somewhere to insert the saw and do your turn. You want to take a look at your drill bit and try to find one that is at least close to the thickness of what your blade is. And I don't want to mess up my pattern, so I'm just gonna get close to it but not quite at it. And just come in here and start my turn. If you're nervous, you can always run your saw off the edge. Also, jigsaws are designed so that as long as you stop the saw, you can just pull the blade out and readjust yourself. Put in another pilot hole if I needed to, whatever is most comfortable for you. Now I can come in and do my cleanup on my circle. I am in a very well ventilated area. I highly recommend when you're dealing with sawdust that you do mask up. I'm gonna hit this with some pretty hardcore sandpaper. This is a 60 grit. If you don't have cork, that's fine. You can just get yourself a piece of scrap wood to do the job. I'm gonna soften my edges a little bit while I'm here. It'll just make it easier when I put the upholstery fabric on. I did not mark my pieces. It's a good idea so that you don't accidentally cut a wrong piece to mark out what you have. This is my base, and I will need 2 pieces for my sides. So I'm gonna trace this out and cut a second piece. In order to get that lounge lean, you're gonna want to have your end piece kicked back a bit. So I'm just eyeballing how far back I want this to go and looking at this space here. Look at this surface and try to follow a parallel line. The side of my plywood, it has some grooves in it. You can see there's 3 lamination lines. I'm looking at my middle one. I'm eyeing what looks like a parallel line. You could have a buddy hold up a straight edge, hold like a ruler up, and one other person come in and draw. I'm going to be cutting this piece off. You could do this with sanding, or you can clamp this down. Sometimes when I have a piece like this that's so small, I'll just clamp it down to another piece of plywood to take my cut. So I'm going to go ahead and take that off of both of my pieces. Now I could have said, okay, this is the angle I want before I made the first cut. I have to fit this into a special space in my dragon, so I had to make sure that my lean didn't kick out too much. These are going to end up one end and one end, and this will create that part that's curled over. The next thing we need is a back piece here, and I'm going to need it to start up here at this height and then kind of do this little whatever type of shape I want to happen there. It doesn't have to be perfect. Somewhere around here is my starting point, and I know that I have 20 inches in length, but I don't need to go the full 20 inches, so maybe about 16. So this is the space I'm working with. You could get something round to get you that curve. I'm just gonna freehand, let's see. I like the idea of 2 bumps. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Alrighty, and we're getting jiggy to cut this out again. I am almost there, but I do need to account for the angle so that this piece can butt up next to it. Hold this up next to it, get this to where it meets the top, and I'm just pinching these 2 pieces together so I can score a line, and I am gonna make that cut next, and it is close enough for me. The very last thing we need to do is get ourselves some supports running across this way, and this can be done by just cutting some extra strips of plywood, and that will give me a way to connect these 2. I will be cutting the strips my length of 14. Before we move on, let's do a quick rundown of all of our parts. I have my main base. This is going to be the main part that I upholster the cushion on. I then cut a second piece that is 1 inch smaller that I'm going to be attaching my legs to, just calling that the bottom. I have my backrest piece. There are 2 pieces for the arms, and then all of the parts that gonna put the arms together. So I ended up going with 3/4. The 1 inch was a little too thick, so I cut 4 of them to go around this loop, 3/4 inch wide by 14 inches long. Then I have one inch piece for the bottom down here, 2 pieces that will come on to the long side, 1 for the top, 1 for the bottom, and then I have 1 for the short side. They make round balls at the craft store. These are little candle cups. I thought they were a little more interesting than just the round balls, and that's going to become my feet. You could use curtain finials. I found these at Joann's. Before I can start assembling anything, I need to get this main arm piece put together. This is the most complicated part. If you don't want to put on something this complicated, you could just leave it open and just have that backrest, but I do want to have that full chaise look, so I need to have that curve. I like to use screws because these pieces are so thin and the plywood is so thin. I'm not going to be able to get away with screwing this time, so I'm going to be using some nails. I think these 1 inchers will get me going. If I had gone with a thicker plywood, I definitely could have used screws. Let's go with the bottom. I'm going to put a little bit of glue down, and then I can tack this in with my nail. Get my fingers out the way. I can flip it over, add some glue to the other one. Now you have to eyeball your alignment at first. The next one I'm going to do is that first top piece. This will stabilize the whole thing somewhat. You don't have to be right on the edge. It's better that you don't have it sticking over because you don't want to mess up your round curve. So I have it kind of stepped back a little bit. May seem a little flimsy at first, but the glue will dry and hold everything in place. And number two, once you start staple gunning things to this, it'll really hold everything all together. Okay, now we can start adding the ones that help a little bit more with the stabilization, which is these guys. That basically at the center of the short side, and then this one's gonna go up here. Okay, did notice that as I was hammering, some of the things came a little bit undone. You might have to give it a final whack together. Set this aside to dry overnight before we begin assembly. I have all of my parts cut out of the wood. The side rest is dried overnight. Some of the other items that I've picked up are my fabric coverings. Anything that is like faux suede, the texture of faux suede is one of the best fabrics for pets in general. Their claws can't really pull at the material, so even if they try to scratch, it's resistant. So I picked up this black faux suede I'm going to be using for the whole chaise, and some of this fake satin with these little shimmery diamond things on them I'm going to use with cording, and this is going to become my piping to go around the edges. My foam, and the batting. Foam and batting. Whenever you are upholstering something, you need your foam, your strong foam, and I like to use pretty solid strong foam. Hello, Lola. Hi, this is Lola's premiere. Y'all have not met Miss Lola. This is Lola. Oh, where are you going? She has very much so kitten energy. She's like always all over the place. Anyhow, so I have this thick upholstery foam, which I really like using for my main cushions, and because the back and the side rest is going to be a little bit thinner, I have a 1/2 inch same foam. But whenever you upholster anything, after you put on that foam, you can't just go over it with regular fabric. You need to give it a layer of batting. The batting will soften the edges and keep your layer of upholstery fabric nice and smooth. So I also have quilter's batting. Normally you go over your pieces with some kind of muslin or thin canvas, but because I have a bunch of this black fabric that I didn't actually end up using, this was supposed to go into the dragon, I'm just going to use this stuff. The other thing I'll be using is a staple gun. You don't have to have an electric one. You can use your typical staple gun. If you are using the spring-loaded, have a hammer, and I have 5/16 staples. I'm going to start with my thick foam. I'm only using this for the base. Everything else is going to be that 1/2 inch foam. I like to just take a Sharpie to mark my foam. There are many ways to cut this. If you have a foam cutter, you could use that. This is an electric pumpkin carver that I got for $5 at Michael's. It does it pretty quickly. You can just carve through. You can get by with just a knife. The pocket knife will get you there. This might take a couple passes. Usually I have to do one pass and then I pull at it and give myself another go. You could use a bandsaw. You could use a pair of scissors, sharp pair of fabric scissors. Anyhow, point is, you gotta cut your foam down. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this cut down. The next thing I'm gonna do is apply fast tack upholstery adhesive to both my wood and to the foam. After you spray it on, you're supposed to let it dry a little bit till it gets a little bit tacky before you smack the two pieces together. Get it smacked on. Alright, that's one. Inside the dragon, I actually need it to be this way. So I want to make sure I put the foam on this side. This is going to be a little piecing together because I want to make sure I have enough. I think I'm going to hide the seam in this part because this part will be like that. When I hide the seam, it's somewhere in here that's not visible. I'm going to spray adhesive the two pieces. For this one, we're gonna staple gun. I have my safety glasses on. You always want to be wearing a pair of safety glasses. Now, thankfully, bar is here. This is what we had it for so that we can do our stapling. Just putting a couple in place, and then I'm gonna try and get a couple right underneath where that curve is. So I'm looking for those wood supports I put in. I'm trying to avoid my bottom edge. I don't really want to put this thick foam down there. I will put some batting just to make it smooth. Now I can trim up my edges. I need to cut batting to size. I'm going to start with the base. I need to make sure I give myself a little extra so I can staple. Where the heck did the scissors go? Oh. I'm going to double this one. I also want to prep my black fabric scrim that's going over this. In your case, you might be using a muslin. Using this black is not going to be an issue for me because I am using a black suede finish fabric. If you have a lighter something, you might want to stick with the muslin. It's a little more neutral. What used to be my good fabric scissors, but I used one too many times for resin. We're not going to discuss that. You're going to layer your batting and your muslin or scrim, whatever you're using. All right, once you have that, you're going to flip. Now I like to give myself a placement tack before we start pulling. Give yourself one tack. Then you're gonna turn, pull some tautness, and tack again. Now, I do not have to go super crazy on this whole pulling taut whatever thing because this is for a cat. If I was upholstering something that humans are gonna sit on, it's gonna be bearing much more weight. You're gonna want to really make sure that you have a good upholstery fit. If you're just making pet furniture, you don't have to go crazy. Your cat or your dog is not gonna complain about the tautness of your fabric. If they do, then they're divas. You know, my boy might complain. You know, he's a little, I don't know. Boy cat behind me is way more human than cat. These positions are just kind of here to place things. As I begin to put the upholstery fabric in, we're going to be tacking the crap out of this thing. But for now, that's there. I'm going to look over. You probably will have this creasing in the middle right now, which is fine because you're going to be pulling this end, which will get you there. Now you're looking to get rid of wrinkles at this point. As you're working, you're going to be pulling and holding, but also looking to remove any of those wrinkles as you're doing. The great thing about the scrim is you are working out all your problems, all your wrinkly, whatever junky things that are happening, you're working it out in the scrim. When you go to put your finished fabric on, it's extra smooth. Now I don't want these big bulky corners, so I'm going to trim some of this out. There are many different ways to do corners. I prefer a more rounded corner. When you put on the finished layer, I will make this a little bit more refined. You want to try and get it to where you have the least amount of wrinkles. I'm going to come in and trim. This is going to eventually get screwed onto here and give us a nice finish that the little legs are attached to. Okay, this is going to get set aside and I'm going to move on to repeating this process with the other two parts. Time for me to apply the final fabric. I'm going to start with the base because it's the largest piece and I want to make sure that I have enough fabric to go around. Before we move on, I want to talk a little bit about assembly. This is going to get assembled like so with the side here. For this side piece, I'm going to be installing these brackets prior to me putting the final finish on. So these two will get just screwed on like this, and then I will cover over the remaining parts with the final fabric. This is going to get put on like this. I'm going to overhang my bottom piece, the piece that's going to have the legs, to span across these two so I can screw it to this and screw it to this, and that'll hold it together. But that means that I will have this slightly offset like so. I want my finished fabric to come over this edge just a little bit. Sometimes as I get close to where my edge is, I won't staple all the way down, so I can easily pull the staple back out if I need to. To get a clean corner, you wanna fix one side up close, so I can tuck under, tuck and pull while I'm holding there. This is one option. You come over and you get a cleanness here. Either way, you're still gonna have a wrinkle on this edge. This side will have an arm coming up against here. I don't have to worry too much, but I also want to get the practice in. You know, this fabric is so stretchy. I think stretch the heck out of it to get rid of those wrinkles altogether. Aha! Look at that. Not too shabby. Once I was satisfied with all of the positioning, I went ahead and I loaded it all up with staples. And there is the first piece. All right, now I'm gonna move on to repeating this process, sorta, for the other two pieces. To finish off the ends and to hide all of those staples, I've made a couple more pieces of wood templates and then sprayed them with some spray paint. The next thing I did was attach the brackets. I used the cording and some accent fabric to make some trim using my hot glue gun. A combination of tacky glue and some carpet tacks held all of the trim in place. I attached the wood pieces that were hiding my staples with some screws, and then I used some spackle to cover over the holes. Then it was time to assemble. For touch-ups, I sprayed a little spray paint in the cap and used a brush to cover over those spackle spots. It is fully assembled. I did go in and add in an extra bracket just to pull these two pieces together. It feels just much more secure that way. And here we are in the front. It is all ready to go. It is a throne fit for a king, and all that is left is to load it on into the dragon. I think his throne is gonna live over in this corner. What y'all think? Ignore the temporary rug there in the corner. I think that this looks pretty good here. Alright y'all, I am gonna call this one here. Please like, share, and subscribe if you have not done so already. Stick around to see all of the awesome projects that are gonna fill this space. And remember, don't wake the dragon.